The last hope. It all began with a tiny lab sample, an invisible enemy, created in sterile conditions, under bright fluorescent lights, and the silent approval of people in white coats. Silver 9 was meant to be a breakthrough in the fight against parasitic fungi that infect the brain. Instead, it became the end of everything. The virus spun out of control within weeks. The first symptoms appeared as hallucinations, loss of spatial awareness, then came aggression, personality, distortion, and biological mutations. Within a month, cities were burning. Within a year, humanity existed only in fragments. Ella, a former nurse from Seattle, lost everything in the first few weeks. Her daughter was evacuated on a military helicopter, promised safety, but the signal went dead, and no news ever came. Since then, she'd been on the move, clinging to the thought of her child as the only reason to keep going. 15 years later, the world had changed. People lived in isolated enclaves, far from the cities. Urban areas had become nests for the infected. Nature was slowly reclaiming the concrete, but those who were infected still lurked in the shadows, moving silently until a sound triggered their warped instincts. South of the ruins of Seattle, Ella met a boy, no older than 17. His face bore no scars of cruelty or loss, only calm determination. He held an old key, marked with a government lab emblem, and a map scribbled in a child's handwriting. It was her first encounter in years with someone who still believed in purpose. He was searching for his sister. He had a reason to head north to a facility called NordGen, where rumors claimed traces of a vaccine still existed. They traveled together, speaking little. The road was perilous. Collapsed bridges, caved-in tunnels, broken power lines, overgrown forests, where something unnatural moved among the trees. At night, they hid in the remnants of civilization, empty libraries, subway passages, shattered school buildings. They bartered food for medicine and medicine for silent gratitude. Ella's thoughts never left the image of her lost daughter. He silently clutched a photo of his sister. They were bound by grief they didn't dare name. But something unseen had begun to tether them together. They were no longer just surviving side by side. They were moving forward together. Their journey continued. Ahead lay infected with new mutations, armed raiders who had lost their humanity, and broken communication stations that occasionally emitted strange signals. At the center of it all was the NordGen complex, the place all roads seemed to lead to, even if no one promised a way back. They approached an abandoned settlement that once housed a water purification station. Now it was swallowed by weeds and silence. Ella didn't trust concrete structures. The infected often nested there. But night was falling fast, and they needed shelter. Inside, the air smelled of dampness, rusted metal, and something else faint but familiar. That sense had saved her life more than once. She motioned for the boy to stop, and together they listened to the silence. Something moved in the shadows. Not just one thing, several. The fungal strain of the virus didn't just transform the body, it merged it with the environment. Some infected fused with the walls, others grew out of the floor. They lived in a kind of half-sleep, reacting to sound or movement, like monstrous plants driven by a predator's instinct. Ella knew the only way to survive was with absolute caution. They moved slowly, in complete silence, like ghosts among the forgotten phantoms of humanity. That night, they slept in the attic of a collapsed shed, covered with a torn plastic tarp. In the darkness, Ella didn't sleep. Her thoughts drifted to the place where her daughter had been taken, but somehow, the boy's presence lightened the weight of that pain. He didn't ask questions, didn't seek comfort, but his silent presence was a kind of support, as quiet and constant as the world around them. At dawn, they moved on. With every mile, the landscape grew grimmer. Highways were cracked and moss-covered. Cars rusted under open skies. The city they approached was once called Tacoma. Now its map was slashed with warnings left by other travelers. Do not enter. They hear, silence is survival. In the heart of the city, they found a temporary camp. Everything had been abandoned belongings, canned food, children's toys. But something in the air felt wrong. Ella noticed dark stains on the walls and tracks leading into one of the buildings. Inside, it became clear people had fought to the end and lost. Amid the chaos, they found a note. It spoke of transporting an experimental vaccine sample to NordGen. Theo reacted with near religious certainty. This path was their only chance. That night, they crossed through an industrial zone when the first mutated infected emerged from behind the walls. Its body was half human, half overgrown skin split open, spores leaking from the cracks, and eyes no longer human. Its hearing was unnaturally sharp. Even the smallest breath could mean death. Ella knew escape would mean breaking their own rules. They had no choice but to run and risk everything. After a nightmarish chase, injured and exhausted, they found themselves in the forest once again. There, among the fog-drenched trees, something unexpected happened. Theo, usually so restrained, so quiet, revealed the truth. His sister hadn't just been taken to NordGen. She was part of the experiment. She was one of the few who hadn't succumbed to the virus. And she might still be alive. That truth changed everything. Ella no longer saw him as just a teenager. She saw the same hope a parent clings to, the hope she once carried herself. And maybe something more, something that stirred a sense of trust in her, something the world had long since stolen. With each passing day, the forest grew denser, darker and older, it seemed, than humanity itself. Towering trees reached silently toward the grey sky, their limbs trembling in a wind that carried the scent of charred wood, decay, and damp earth. Ella and Theo moved slowly, guided by the remnants of broken signs, leading toward what had once been known as the NordGen research facility. This road was the final thread of hope for both of them. Theo was searching for his sister, Ella for any sign that something in the world was still worth fighting for. What bound them wasn't just a shared goal, but a mutual understanding. Each had lost everything. By evening, the sky was streaked with a brownish haze. Their path led to an old military checkpoint. Beyond it lay the quarantine zone, one of the last places once under strict control. Now it stood abandoned, sagging wires, silent turrets, rusted gates, shattered floodlights. But the place didn't feel empty. It breathed fear, history. They slipped through a breach in the wall. Inside, they found remnants of people not infected, just those who hadn't survived the hunger or the dread. Scattered everywhere were children's belongings, used syringes, and words scrawled across the walls. Desperate messages pleading for help that never came. While Theo searched a nearby room, Ella noticed something strange. One of the generators, connected to an old computer terminal, was blinking faintly. It was still working. On the screen, symbols slowly appeared, the NordGen research logo and a message: Power reserve critical. Facility defense active. Access restricted. The system recognized the token Theo carried. It turned out his sister Sophie hadn't just been a patient. She had a unique immunity. Her blood had been the basis for the experimental vaccine. She was the subject, the one they were trying to protect at all costs. Somewhere in this facility, her DNA was preserved, and possibly Sophie herself. But to reach the lab, they would have to pass through the greatest danger yet, the inner zone home to the cluster. The cluster wasn't like other infected. It was a network of them bodies fused by fungal overgrowth, moving as one entity. Intelligent, coordinated, they hunted like a pack, communicating without sound. They guarded the core, like a hive defends its queen. Ella knew the way back was gone. She also knew no one else could make it through what waited ahead. They had to do this not for themselves, but for those who might still live in a world without the virus. Darkness cloaked the research facility like a shroud of death. The silence was so profound that even breathing felt like a crime. Ella and Theo moved carefully through the overgrowth of spores and fungal masses that had overtaken the walls, equipment, and furniture. Everything around them was damp, alive, and yet unmistakably dead. Deep within the facility, they encountered the first of the cluster. These creatures were fused together, their bodies linked by long mycelial strands that branched like nerves. Some of their eyes glowed faintly, but not all had faces. Many had become nothing more than parts of something larger. They didn't attack right away. They listened. They studied. Ella realized this was a new stage in the virus's evolution. It was no longer just a disease. It had adapted, formed a collective intelligence capable of defense and strategy. They didn't kill randomly. They understood who the enemy was. The path to the core of the facility led through the former research wing. Echoes of civilization still lingered there, flickering monitors, rooms filled with consoles, samples preserved in reinforced containers. One of them held blood, labeled S. Lindholm. Theo flinched. Sophie might still be here alive, or in stasis. She was the key. But the signal they activated to search for her triggered the cluster's fury. The creatures screamed. The entire facility shook. The veins of fungus that lined the walls began to pulse and move, as if the building itself were alive and waking up. They had disturbed something primal. When it became clear that escape was impossible, Theo made a decision. He would distract the mutated hive. Ella begged him not to, but it was too late. There was a quiet finality in his eyes that said everything. Without another word, he sprinted into the darkness, leaving her behind at the sealed hatch. Ella activated the emergency protocol. The doors slammed shut. She was alone, standing beside the capsule. Inside lay a young girl, unchanged from the photographs Theo had shown her. Ella's heart clenched. She knew now she had to protect this child, no matter what. While the world outside screamed in chaos, Ella stared at the girl, the fragile vessel of something humanity had lost. Then the system's self-destruct sequence began. An old security measure. She had minutes, just enough time to evacuate the capsule. Without hesitation, she hoisted it onto her shoulders. Explosions thundered through the hallways. The fungal growths caught fire. The creatures howled in agony. She ran through smoke, flame, and falling debris. At the edge of the facility, dawn was waiting. Much of the zone behind her was burning, but she had survived. And in her arms, she carried hope, warm and still. But Theo never came back. Years had passed. The world was no longer the ruin Ella remembered. People had slowly begun to rebuild. Small settlements grew among the remains of the old world. Fields bloomed where once there was ash, and silence gave way to the laughter of children playing near rebuilt homes. Sophie had grown up. Her immunity had become the foundation for a new generation of vaccines. She was no longer the girl in the capsule, She was a symbol of the future Ella had once only dreamed of. But every step Sophie took, every smile she shared, reminded Ella of Theo, the boy who had given everything to save his sister. His face never faded from her memory. She carried him with her every day. One evening, during the annual Restoration Festival, a celebration of humanity's survival and victory over the virus, Ella strolled quietly through the city streets. The air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh bread, wood smoke, and flowers. She paused near a bench and suddenly felt someone's gaze. Turning, she met the eyes of a man. He stood still calm, slightly disoriented with a small scar on his cheek. The same place Theo's had been. His features were too familiar. Ella's heart stopped. She walked closer, hoping it was just a trick of the light, a memory playing games. But the nearer she came, the clearer it became. It was him. The man didn't recognize her. His eyes were clear, calm but empty, as if something inside had been wiped away. He introduced himself with a different name. He remembered nothing, not the facility, not Sophie. He'd been found unconscious in the far north, rescued by locals. He had no idea who he used to be. Ella listened without saying a word. She smiled through tears. She didn't need answers. She felt the same quiet warmth he once gave her in the darkest of times. Even if his memories were gone, his soul had come back. And in the silence between them, there was no emptiness, only love. A love that had survived death itself, one that no virus could destroy, no time could erase. It remained,